Hello, New Covenant Parish. Good to be with you to look at lectionary texts for this coming Sunday, which will be the first Sunday in the season of Lent. Now, this week we won't have a post on Thursday, but we will have one on Wednesday to begin the season of Lent on Ash Wednesday. But today we're going to look first at the Old Testament text for this week from Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 through 17. So before we talk about it, let's hear it together. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said this to Noah, "And this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This reading is the second part of a covenant, which takes the form here of an agreement or a promise God makes with Noah and his family after saving them from the great flood that God sent upon the earth. The flood account begins in Genesis 6. And in verses 8 through 10, God's first words focus on who God is and what God's going to do. "As for me," God says, and then he lays out what he alone is going to do in the relationship God will share with Noah, his family, and his descendants. And later in the reading, we'll see the whole world. God says, "I'm going to establish a covenant." And Noah will have no part in this new covenant. Usually in the Bible, when a covenant is made, there are mutual obligations agreed on by the parties. I'll agree to do this, you agree to do that, just like a contract. But this covenant is all about God's doing. It's an act of amazing graciousness and self-giving on God's part. This is a unilateral covenant God makes not only with the human community, which consists at this point of just Noah's family, everybody else has been destroyed, but also with all the creatures on the earth saved from the flood by the ark. So this is the voice of the Creator God making a new pledge of loyalty to his creation. And in terms of scope, the biggest problem in the whole passage is found in verse 11, where God says, "Never again will there be a flood that destroys the earth." And then, after this comprehensive promise is made, the rest of the reading is concerned with the covenant sign that signifies the promise. And in the Bible, a covenant sign it's like a visible seal and reminder of covenant commitments. Circumcision will become the sign of the covenant with Abraham in Genesis 17. The Sabbath will be the sign of the covenant with Israel at Sinai, Exodus 36. The Lord's Supper is a sign of the new covenant in Jesus Christ. We read about it in Luke 22, one of the places. Now, in our reading, verses 12 and 17, we see the comprehensiveness of God's promise. The phrases, "every living creature" in verse 12, and "all flesh" in verse 17, tells us God's faithfulness is promised to all creation. The physical sign of God's faithfulness is the bow. It's a rainbow in the sky. And this is probably referring to God's bow as a weapon of war, hostility, destruction. The bow suspended in the sky is a sign that God is hung up. He's just hung up, the primary weapon that caused the destruction of the flood, and will not use it again. The rainbow becomes a symbol of peace and reconciliation God makes with the world. But note also another purpose of the bow here. In verses 14 and 16, twice God pauses to see the bow and is reminded of what he's promised. So the bow is not primarily a message to humanity. What it is is an elemental reminder to God to be faithful forever to all his creation. And you see a lot of petitions in the Psalms asking God to remember and not forget his people. You'll see a list of these on the worship schedule announcement this week. If you'd like to look them up, I'll put them there. And there are also some texts and stories that tell us when God remembers, gracious things happen in the world through his memory. Read Exodus 2:24, one example of that. Here at the end of the flood account, there are several things we need to remember about our relationship to God and one another and this world. Now, we learned earlier in Genesis, the beginning of the flood stories, it was because of evil in the human heart that God decided to destroy the world. And while God makes a covenant never to curse the earth again and never to strike down every creature because of evil found in the hearts of humans, still, the new creation after the flood did not cleanse the evil found in human hearts. Absolutely not. I mean, evil continues to run rampant in a post-flood world. So maybe humans didn't change, but God, in this story, thanks be to him, had a merciful change of heart about us. Although we continue to take part in evil, God chooses to make a covenant with us regardless. And in this new world order, humanity, well, we don't need to fear extinction. We can trust and find hope in a new relationship with a creator God who has promised to be merciful and patient toward us. And unlike future covenants God would make with Abraham and Moses, the covenant with Noah is not just made for the people of Israel. It's a covenant made with all humanity. And just as important, with all creation. So from the time of Noah until today, and stretching only God knows how long into the future, the well-being of humans will always be intertwined, interconnected with the well-being of the planet and all the forms of life it contains. So, next time you see a rainbow, remember, God cares for us, along with all the people in this world and all his creation as well. And he wants us to care too. Good to be with you today, my friends. God bless you. See you again soon.